Okay, we're going to switch characters in this session. We're going to consider Elijah. For that, I'd like you to turn to 1 Kings chapter 18. Elijah is another servant of God, another missionary who needed a fresh vision of God and received one on a number of occasions again. The first one that we're going to consider in this session was really the mountaintop experience for Elijah on Mount Carmel. You're familiar with the story, how he defeated the 400 prophets of Baal. And we'll get to that. But before we get to that, I want to talk about another prophet, Obadiah, who was present with Elijah and who we read about in the first part of chapter 18. And what we're going to see here is Obadiah might have missed the mountaintop experience. And we're going to see some reasons that he did and why Elijah did not miss the mountaintop. So that's going to kind of be what our lesson is here. I think we've talked about asking to see God's glory. We've talked about the beatific vision. We've talked about the burning bush. And God does want to reveal himself to us, and we will see him if we seek him. We'll find him with all our. We'll find him if we seek him with all our hearts. It says in Deuteronomy 4:29. So Elijah sought God. Obadiah had other interests, and that's what we want to consider first of all, and then we'll look at the actual mountaintop experience that Elijah had. So first of all, 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 1, after a long time in the third year, the word of the Lord came to Elijah, "Go and present yourself to Ahab. He was the wicked king of Israel, and I will send rain on the land." So Elijah went to present himself to Ahab. This was in the context of a severe famine, as it says next. The famine was severe in Samaria, and Ahab had summoned Obadiah, his palace administrator. Obadiah was a devout believer in the Lord. While Jezebel was killing off the Lord's prophets, Obadiah had taken 100 prophets and hidden them in 2 caves, 50 in each, and had supplied them with food and water. So I said earlier Obadiah was a prophet. He really wasn't, but he was very supportive of the prophet's cause. Verse 5, Ahab had said to Obadiah, "Go through the land to all the springs and valleys. Maybe we can find some grass to keep the horses and mules alive, so we will not have to kill any of our animals." So they divided the land they were to cover, Ahab going in one direction and Obadiah in another. As Obadiah was walking along, Elijah the prophet met him. Obadiah recognized him, bowed down to the ground, and said, "Is it really you, my lord Elijah?" "Yes," he replied. "Go tell your master Elijah is here." And then this gets kind of interesting. Obadiah says in verse 9, "What have I done wrong, that you are handing your servant over to Ahab to be put to death?" The reason Obadiah is insecure is Elijah was the one who prophesied the years of drought in the first place. So Ahab kind of blamed the drought on Elijah. Verse 10. This is still Obadiah speaking to Elijah. "As surely as the Lord your God lives, there's not a nation or kingdom where my master has not sent someone to look for you. And whenever a nation or kingdom claimed you were not there, he made them swear they could not find you. But now you tell me, go to my master and say, Elijah is here? Well, I don't know where the Spirit of the Lord may carry you when I leave you. If I go and tell Ahab and he doesn't find you, he'll kill me. Yet I, your servant, have worshipped the Lord since my youth. Haven't you heard, my lord Elisha, what I did while Jezebel was killing the prophets of the Lord? I hid 100 of the Lord's prophets in 2 caves, 50 in each, and supplied them with food and water. And now you tell me, go to my master and say, Elijah is here? He will kill me." Elijah said, "As surely as the Lord Almighty lives, whom I serve, I will surely present myself to Ahab tomorrow." So Obadiah went to meet Ahab and told him, and Ahab went to meet Elijah. When he saw Elijah, he said to him, "Is that you, you troubler of Israel?" All right. Obadiah had some fears, and I think those kind of things can cause us to miss out on some of the mountaintop vision of God experiences. And I don't know if Obadiah experienced what Elijah did or not on this mountaintop. If not, it was probably because of one of these reasons that he missed the mountaintop experience. And so I just want to pause the tape here and have you, the video a little bit, and have you talk about what is it within ourselves, what is it about our faith or about our fears that might cause us to miss certain visions of God, fresh vision of God, or mountaintop experiences. Talk about that amongst yourselves. All right, I want to give you 4 things that I see from the text that may hinder us from experiencing fresh vision, mountaintop vision of God. And those come out of the life of Obadiah. First of all, Obadiah had a divided loyalty. Verse 3, he was Ahab's palace administrator, but he was also a devout believer in the Lord. So he had divided loyalty. He had to serve Ahab, and Ahab was a wicked, wicked king. And yet he was also a devout believer in the Lord. So undivided loyalty. It's so important if we're going to receive fresh vision from God often, that we are undividedly loyal and devoted to Jesus. He must be primary. He must be our entire life. If we have a foot in 2 worlds, we're going to miss some of the fresh mountaintop vision that God wants to give us. Secondly, in Obadiah, I see there was a fear of others instead of fearing God. His fear, his long speech of his fear in going back to Ahab and telling Ahab that Elijah was going to come to see him, he was afraid for his life. Fear of others instead of fearing or trusting God will keep us from experiencing fresh vision from God. We can't be afraid of others. We can't be afraid of circumstances. We must move forward in obedience if we expect to see fresh vision of God. Thirdly, I think Obadiah had a confidence in his own deeds instead of a confidence in God. He was basing his entitlement, so to speak, from the text I read, on what he had done. Hadn't you heard, Lord Elijah, that when Jezebel was killing off the prophets, I saved 100 of them. I put 50 in this cave and 50 in this cave. He was appealing to his own acts of good works and righteousness. That will keep us from experiencing a fresh vision from God if we depend on our works instead of the work of God. And finally, and fourth, he functioned without fresh vision or word from God. He went about his work without experiencing fresh vision from God. So this as well can hinder us if we just aren't mindful, if we don't have the passion that Moses did to say, now show me your glory. If we just go through life in a functional relationship with God, not really passionate for his glory or passionate to know him in a deeper, more profound way, God doesn't force himself on us. And unless we really are passionate to receive and to see this fresh vision from God, I'm not sure we'll ever experience it. Now let's go on and see how Elijah experienced this incredible mountaintop, fresh vision from the Lord and God's answer. Elijah basically challenges Ahab to a duel of prophets on the top of Mount Carmel. And I'm going to pause the video again and ask you to read that. If you'll read chapter 18 now, verses 18 through 24, this kind of sets the stage for this challenge of dueling prophets on Mount Carmel. So read that text. Okay, now let's pick it up in verse 25. Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, you guys go first. Choose one of the bulls and prepare it. Since there's so many of you, call on the name of your God, but do not light the fire. So they took the bull given them and prepared it. Then they called on the name of Baal from morning till noon, so half a day. Baal, answer us, they shouted, but there was no response. No one answered. Then they danced around the altar they had made, frantically shouting, Baal, answer us. At noon, after several hours of this, Elijah began to taunt them. I just love this. This is such a funny story. Shout louder, Elijah said. Surely he's a god. Shout louder. Perhaps he's deep in thought and he's not paying attention to you. Or maybe he's just busy. Maybe he's traveling. Maybe he went on vacation with his family and he's traveling and he's not home. Shout louder. Maybe he's just sleeping. Maybe he's tired today, taking a nap. If you shout louder, I bet you can wake him up. He's just mercilessly taunting them. And so, 28, they shouted louder, and they even slashed themselves with swords and spears, as was their custom, until their blood flowed. Imagine this. Midday passed, and they continued their frantic prophesying until the time for the evening sacrifice. But there was no response. No one answered. No one paid attention. Finally, after hours of this, Elijah said to all the people, "Come here to me." They came to him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord, which had been torn down. Elijah took 12 stones, one for each of the 12 tribes descending from Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord had come, saying, "Your name shall be Israel." With the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord, and he dug a trench around it large enough to hold 2 seahs of seed. He arranged the wood, cut the bowl into pieces, and laid it on the wood. And then he said to them, "Now fill 4 large jars with water and pour it on the offering and on the wood." They did that, and then he said, "Do it again." They did it again. "Do it a third time," he ordered, and they did it a third time until water ran down around the altar and even filled this trench. Then at the time of the sacrifice, Elijah stepped forward and prayed. "Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel and that I am your servant and have done these things at your command. Answer me, Lord, answer me, so these people will know that you, Lord, are God and that you are turning their hearts back again." So Elijah prays for God to reveal himself, fresh vision of God. And he's confident because he says God told him to do these very things. So sometimes we wonder, how could this man be so bold? Well, God laid all this out for him. Said, "Here's what I want you to do. Here's how I'm going to show up." So when God wants us to do something quite radical, I don't think it's unusual for him to give us quite a few specifics about that. That's certainly what he did for Elijah in this context. Let's look at verse 38. "Then the fire of the Lord fell and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and the soil. Also licked up the water in the trench. When all the people saw this, they fell prostrate and cried, 'The Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God.'" God had revealed himself by burning up this altar. As you read on here, Elijah has all the prophets of Baal killed. And then Elijah said to Ahab in verse 41, "Go eat and drink, for there's the sound of a heavy rain." So Ahab went off to eat and drink, but Elijah climbed the top of Mount Carmel, bent down to the ground, and put his face between his knees. "Go look toward the sea," he told his servant, and he went up and looked. "There's nothing there," he said. 7 times Elijah said, "Go back." The 7th time the servant reported, "A cloud as small as a man's hand is rising from the sea." So Elijah said, "Go and tell Ahab, hitch up your chariot and go down before the rain stops you." Meanwhile, the sky grew black with clouds, the wind rose, a heavy rain started falling, and Ahab rode off to Jezreel. The power of the Lord came on Elijah, and tucking his cloak into his belt, he ran ahead of Ahab all the way to Jezreel. God showed up. God gave Elijah an incredible victory on Mount Carmel that day. What I want you to discuss as we wrap this session up is just talk a little bit. What mountaintop things do you feel God is about to do amongst the Yelunka? What mountaintop things has he done in your life? Maybe you want to share some of that. Steve, maybe you want to, and Pat, you want to share some things that happened earlier in your years in Africa. Ashley, feel free to share some of the mountaintops in your life. It's our past mountaintops that can propel us forward. So just share some of those and pray together about what mountaintops God might have for you in the future amongst the Yelunka, and pray for those. Pray that God would do mighty things by way of fresh vision for you and amongst the Yelunka people.